A cold wind swept through New York that night, yet in the alley beside Madison Square Garden, two Hollywood legends froze at the sound of a broken guitar. A homeless man played with trembling hands, his song haunting, his story untold. Keanu Reeves looked at Johnny Depp and whispered, "We can't just walk away." What happened next stunned the world. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The roar of the crowd still echoed through the tunnels beneath Madison Square Garden. It was one of those spring nights when New York pulsed with energy cars honking, laughter spilling from restaurants, the air heavy with rain and exhaust. The benefit concert had gone on for hours, and when the final applause faded, Keanu Reeves and Johnny Depp slipped out the side exit, away from the flash of cameras and endless noise. They didn't need the spotlight tonight. Both men had performed, smiled for the press, shaken hands with donors, but once the curtain dropped, what they wanted most was quiet. They pulled on their coats, stepping into the alley where the city's real rhythm began. The hum of traffic, the rustle of paper cups, and the faint rattle of a subway beneath the pavement. Johnny tugged at his scarf and laughed under his breath. You ever notice how silence is impossible in this city? Keanu glanced around, his expression calm, almost meditative. There's always music somewhere. You just have to listen. They turned a corner, passing a bakery that had closed hours ago. The street was dim, lit by the dull orange glow of an old street lamp. Then it came the faint sound of a guitar, thin and raw, floating through the air. It wasn't polished or precise. It wavered like a heartbeat that had forgotten its rhythm. Yet something about it stopped Keanu mid-step. Johnny noticed his friend's stillness. "You hear that?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's coming from over there." Across the street, near a subway vent that exhaled warm steam, a man sat on a crate. His hair was streaked with gray, his beard untrimmed. His coat hung from his frame like a borrowed shell, and his fingers trembled as they pressed against the strings of an old, weathered guitar. Each note quivered, slightly off, but the melody carried pain and memory, the kind that didn't need perfection to sound beautiful. Keanu and Johnny stood quietly, listening. The world around them blurred into the background, the cars, the footsteps, the sirens in the distance. For a moment, there was only that fragile song. The man's eyes were closed, his body swaying gently, as if each note was a confession whispered to the night. Johnny took a few steps closer. The man didn't notice. His music belonged to another world, far from the noise of fame or fortune. Keanu followed, stopping just short of the sidewalk's edge. The guitar's body was cracked near the neck, held together by duct tape and hope. The strings were uneven, but the emotion behind them was real, deep, and strangely familiar. Keanu felt something stir in him, a quiet ache. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He knew what it meant to carry loss silently, to turn it into something that no one else could quite understand. Johnny's brow furrowed as he listened, his usual restless energy softening into stillness. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. The faint notes wove through the steam drifting from the subway vent. Johnny stood still, hands in his coat pockets, watching the man's fingers move. Each note cracked slightly, like an old record that refused to give up its song. People walked past without slowing down, businessmen, couples, teenagers with earbuds. But Keanu and Johnny remained rooted to the pavement. Something about the music was magnetic, broken, yet alive. Keanu looked closer. The man's eyes were sunken but alert, his lips moving as if silently counting beats. Every few seconds, he stopped to adjust the strings, then began again, determined to find the sound trapped inside that battered guitar. His coat collar was stiff with grime, and a half-empty paper cup sat beside him, collecting only cold coins. Johnny glanced at Keanu. "He's got something," he murmured. Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah, you can feel it." A bus roared past, drowning the melody for a moment. When it faded, The man began a softer tune, one that rose and fell like a story without words. Johnny's brow furrowed. He'd spent years in music, played every stage from smoky bars to stadium lights. But he couldn't remember hearing anything quite like this. It wasn't technique. It was soul stripped bare. Keanu stepped forward. The man didn't notice him at first, lost in his rhythm. When the final chord faded, Keanu crouched down beside him. "That was beautiful," he said, quietly. The man blinked, startled. His voice came rough and dry. "You think so?" Johnny smiled faintly. "It's not something you hear every day." The man gave a short laugh that turned into a cough. "Used to be better. A long time ago." He rubbed his thumb across the neck of the guitar, as if soothing an old wound. Keanu asked, "What's your name?" "Eli," he said after a pause. Eli Turner. The name triggered something faint in Johnny's memory, though he couldn't place it. Eli glanced away, embarrassed. Didn't mean to bother anyone, just trying to remember how it used to sound. Keanu sat on the edge of the curb. "You play because you have to, right?" "Because it's still in there somewhere." Eli looked at him, confused by the kindness in a stranger's tone. Johnny reached into his pocket, pulled out a few folded bills, but Keanu shook his head slightly. "Not yet. Not like that." They stayed like that for a while, the three of them under the flickering streetlight. A small island of stillness amid the restless city. Eli strummed again, and this time, his hands steadied a little, as if the quiet company gave him back something he'd lost. Keanu leaned forward, eyes fixed on those trembling fingers. "Keep playing," he whispered. And Eli did. The melody grew stronger, echoing through the night, like a heartbeat rediscovered. The song drifted down the street, carried on the cold spring air. Somewhere above them, neon lights flickered, reflecting off puddles and the chrome of parked cars. Johnny leaned against a lamppost, arms crossed, listening like a man haunted by a familiar ghost. Keanu sat quietly, his gaze fixed on Eli. It wasn't the kind of moment that needed words. It was one of those fragile, fleeting intersections of lives that the world often overlooks. When Eli finished, his hands lingered on the strings, reluctant to let the sound die. He looked up, expecting the two men to have moved on like everyone else. Instead, they were still there. Keanu offered a small, respectful nod. "That song, what's it called?" Eli gave a weary half-smile. "Doesn't have a name anymore. I used to call it Home, back when I had one." Johnny's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, crouched down, and looked at the guitar's worn body. "You've had that one for a while, haven't you?" Eli chuckled softly. "Since the 90s. She's all I've got left that still listens." A faint rumble shook the sidewalk as a train passed underground. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Keanu said gently, "You ever play for a crowd again?" Eli shook his head. "Crowds don't stop for me anymore. Used to be. I'd make a room go silent. Now I'm lucky if someone tosses $1. Johnny looked at him, really looked the lines of exhaustion, the threadbare clothes, the pride still clinging beneath the ruin. He saw what Keanu saw too, a man who once had a stage and lost it to something darker than failure. Keanu rose, brushing the dust from his coat. "You still have the song," he said quietly. "That's more than most people." Eli gave a confused nod, unsure if it was encouragement or pity. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, warm and steady. "Keep playing tonight. We'll see you again." Eli frowned slightly. "You don't have to," Johnny interrupted with a soft grin. "Maybe we just like good music." They turned to leave, the sound of their footsteps fading into the distance. Eli watched them disappear around the corner, shaking his head in disbelief. Two men in dark coats, vanishing back into the city. He had no idea who they were, only that they'd listened when no one else did. Keanu and Johnny walked in silence for a while, the noise of the city swelling back around them. Finally, Johnny broke the quiet. "You're thinking what I'm thinking?" Keanu glanced sideways. "That he deserves more than a sidewalk?" Johnny nodded. "Yeah, I've seen too many stories end there." Keanu's reply came low and certain. "Then maybe we make sure this one doesn't." The streetlight flickered once more behind them, leaving Eli in its dim glow, strumming softly to the rhythm of hope neither of them yet understood. The next evening, the city breathed the same restless rhythm. But Keanu and Johnny returned to that corner. The same streetlight flickered above the subway vent. Steam rose in curls, carrying the faint smell of oil and rain. Eli Turner was there again, tuning the same battered guitar, his head bent low. He looked smaller tonight, swallowed by the city's endless motion. Johnny walked up first, a paper cup in hand. "Still playing the night shift?" he asked with a faint smile. Eli looked up, startled, and then recognition softened his eyes. "Didn't think you'd come back," he said, voice hoarse from cold and street air. Keanu offered him the coffee, still warm from the corner stand. "You kept your promise," he said quietly. "That means something." Eli nodded and took the cup with shaking hands. He sipped carefully, closing his eyes at the taste of heat. "You two didn't have to do this." "I'm used to being invisible." Johnny crouched down, studying him. "You've got too much music in your fingers to be invisible." Eli gave a small laugh. "Music don't care who plays it. It'll haunt you whether you've got an audience or not." The words lingered. The man's voice was slow, cracked with exhaustion, but still carried the rhythm of someone who once lived by sound. His hands, though rough and scarred, moved with memory when they touched the guitar. Johnny could see muscle memory under the tremor. He knew that look. Every musician did. Keanu sat beside him on the curb, elbows resting on his knees. "You ever play professionally?" Eli nodded faintly. "Used to. Long time ago. Down in New Orleans. Jazz joints. Little bars that don't even exist anymore. I played with some good men. We used to call ourselves the Turner's Trio." "Funny name for a band that didn't last 3 years." Johnny raised his eyebrows. "You were the front man?" Eli smiled a little, proud and sad all at once. "Guitar and vocals. We were doing all right. We had gigs lined up, maybe even a record deal. Then one night my wife and daughter got in a car accident on their way to hear us play. I didn't handle it well. Didn't know how to handle it at all." Keanu said nothing. He just listened, his expression soft but steady. Eli's eyes glistened in the dim light as he looked down at the guitar again. "After that, I played angry, played drunk, lost the gigs, lost the house, lost myself somewhere in between." Johnny whispered, "Man, that's rough." Eli's voice broke slightly. Music stopped being a blessing, started feeling like punishment. But it's all I got left. This old thing kept me breathing. He tapped the cracked guitar body. Everything else went quiet. Keanu watched the man's trembling hands wrap around the coffee cup. The rising steam fogged the cold air between them, the faint smell of roasted beans mixing with the metallic scent of the city. "You wouldn't believe how quiet the world gets when you stop mattering." Johnny crouched beside him, elbows on his knees. "I might believe it more than you think." Eli gave him a curious look. "You a musician too?" Johnny smiled faintly. "Yeah, been one for most of my life. Acting just kind of paid the bills along the way." Recognition flickered in Eli's tired eyes. "You're Johnny Depp, aren't you?" Johnny nodded modestly. "Used to be, at least." Eli turned to Keanu, squinting. "And you're... wait. You're Keanu Reeves." His voice cracked on the name. "What are you doing down here, man? You're supposed to be up there with the rest of the stars." "Sometimes the light up there blinds you from what really matters down here." Eli stared at him for a long moment, then gave a low chuckle. "Well, that's a line worth keeping." He set the coffee down and rubbed his face with both hands. Guess it's not every night I get two movie stars listening to me butcher jazz. Johnny shook his head. You weren't butchering anything. You were feeling it. There's a difference. For a brief second, Eli's eyes softened. The defensive wall around him cracked just enough to show a glimmer of who he used to be. I was good once, he said quietly. Used to headline at a place called the Blue Sparrow down on Canal. We played till sunrise. Folks said I could make a guitar cry. Keanu leaned forward. What happened after that? Eli shrugged. Life, death, you name it. I tried to keep going, but when you lose the people who made your music worth playing, it starts sounding like noise. Johnny's eyes dimmed. He understood. Keanu did too. They'd both known grief that never fully left the kind that turns every silence into an echo. Keanu stood up and glanced toward the diner at the corner. You eaten tonight? Eli hesitated, pride flickering across his face. Not hungry. Johnny stood too. Then come, keep us company while we grab something. Call it payment for that song. Eli smirked. That's the first time anyone's offered to pay me for playing in 10 years. Keanu smiled faintly. Then, tonight's a comeback. Eli chuckled and slowly rose to his feet. He slung the guitar strap over his shoulder like an old friend. As they walked toward the diner, the city noise grew louder again, but for the first time in years, Eli didn't feel like part of the background. Inside the diner, warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. The smell of bacon grease and strong coffee filled the air. A jukebox hummed quietly in the corner, playing an old blues track that seemed to follow them from the street. They slid into a booth near the window, away from curious glances. Eli hesitated at the edge of the seat, as if afraid of belonging somewhere again. Then, finally sat down. The waitress, a kind woman with tired eyes, brought 3 mugs of coffee and a plate of fries without being asked. Guess she's seen her share of nights like mine, he murmured. Keanu smiled. Maybe she has. Maybe everyone's fighting something you can't see. Johnny leaned forward, elbows on the table. So tell us, Eli. You said you used to play jazz in New Orleans. What was it like back then? Eli stared out the window for a long moment, watching the passing headlights smear against the glass. It was wild, he said softly. Smoke in the air, brass horns everywhere. I was just a kid with a 6-string and a head full of dreams. Played in a house band on Bourbon Street. We'd start with standards and end the pros. Night with improvisations that went on for hours. Music was alive back then. It wasn't about money or fame. It was about feeling something honest. Johnny nodded slowly. And when it's gone, you spend the rest of your life chasing that first spark. Eli's mouth twitched into a half smile. Exactly. He took a sip of coffee, his voice growing quiet. I chased it in all the wrong ways. Booze, pills, anything that made me forget the silence between gigs. He ran a hand through his gray hair. By the time I realized I'd lost everything, even my friends stopped picking up the phone. Guess nobody wants to watch a man drown. Keanu looked down at his cup. Sometimes drowning isn't the end, he said gently. Sometimes it's how you learn to breathe again. Eli met his eyes, startled by the weight behind those words. For the first time, he saw not a movie star, but another soul who'd walked through darkness. Johnny gestured toward the guitar leaning against the booth. That thing still sounds like it's got stories left. Eli chuckled. She's cracked, same as me. But yeah, she still sings. Johnny reached over, touched the scarred wood near the neck, and nodded toward Keanu. He's got more story in his hands than most people in an entire album. Keanu gave a faint smile, eyes still on Eli. And some songs aren't finished yet. The streetlights outside glowed against the glass, framing 3 silhouettes, sharing coffee and quiet hope. In that small diner, something unspoken shifted a decision neither of them voiced, but both felt. Keanu and Johnny exchanged a single look that said everything. This man's music wasn't ending here. Outside, the night hummed again, but the city seemed different now. Somewhere in its endless noise, a broken melody had been heard, and two men had silently decided to help it play again. The clock on the diner wall ticked past midnight, yet none of them seemed eager to leave. The outside world had grown quieter, muffled by the drizzle coating the streets. Inside, the hum of the coffee machine and the faint crackle from the jukebox filled the pauses between their words. Keanu leaned back in his seat, studying Eli with that calm, steady expression that always carried more listening than judgment. Eli's fingers drummed absently on the tabletop, echoing the rhythm of songs he used to know. "You ever wonder," he said finally, "how a life just collapses?" Johnny met his gaze. "Yeah, more often than you'd think." Eli gave a bitter chuckle. "Mine folded like a cheap stage. One night, I had a wife and a little girl who thought I hung the moon. 12 years later, I was playing on sidewalks for spare change." His voice cracked, and he looked down at his hands. "It was the same night I told them not to come to the show. I said I needed focus. They came. Anyway." Keanu's eyes softened. "The crash?" Eli nodded slowly. "Some guy ran a red light. I never even saw the car. Got the call halfway through my set. I walked off the stage, never played again." He rubbed his temples as though the memory still rang in his head. "I tried to drown the silence with whiskey. Worked for a while, till the silence got louder." Johnny looked away, jaw tightening. He didn't need to ask what that felt like. He'd seen friends lost to that same silence, swallowed whole by guilt they couldn't name. Keanu's hand rested lightly on the table. "You kept the guitar." Eli gave a small nod. "Couldn't throw it away. Every time I tried, I'd hear my daughter humming along to the old songs. That sound, it kept me breathing, even when I didn't want to." For a long time, none of them spoke. The rain picked up, tapping gently on the diner window. A police siren wailed somewhere far off, fading into the distance. Keanu's gaze never wavered from Eli's face, seeing not just a man beaten by life, but one still standing in its shadow. Johnny broke the silence. "You ever think about getting back on stage?" Eli let out a weary laugh. "Who'd want to listen to a washed-up jazz ghost? My time's long gone." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Maybe it's not about time. Maybe it's about truth. People don't forget truth when they hear it." Eli looked at him, confused by the sincerity in his tone. For the first time, he didn't see pity. He saw belief, something he hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for years. Eli stared into his coffee, the surface rippling slightly as his hand trembled. "You don't get it," he said quietly. "When you've burned every bridge and buried every song, it's not about performing anymore. It's about surviving the next morning." Johnny nodded slowly, his voice gentle. "Maybe. But sometimes surviving isn't enough. Sometimes you have to play to remember who you were." Eli looked up at him, a flicker of anger crossing his face, then fading into exhaustion. "You sound like my old bandmates. They said the same thing until I let them down one too many times. They stopped calling. I stopped caring." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You cared once, though. That's what matters." Eli gave a short, bitter laugh. "You ever lose everything you loved?" The question hung heavy in the air. Keanu's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said softly. "More than once." Eli studied him for a moment, then seemed to recognize the weight behind that single word. He nodded slowly, almost respectfully, and sank back against the booth. "Guess we're all ghosts of someone." Johnny rubbed his temples. "You know what I think? Ghosts still have stories. You've got one that people should hear." Eli shook his head. "Nobody listens to jazz anymore." Keanu smiled faintly. "Then maybe they've forgotten how. Maybe it takes someone like you to remind them." The waitress returned to refill their mugs, glancing curiously at the trio, but saying nothing. When she left, the silence between them turned thoughtful instead of heavy. Eli set his cup down and muttered, "You really think I could do it again? Play like I used to?" Johnny looked at the guitar resting against the booth. "You already did. On that street corner. You made two grown men stop in their tracks." Eli snorted softly. "You two must not get out much." Keanu's lips curved into a small smile. "Maybe not, but I know when something's real." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That music, what you played, it wasn't just notes. It was memory, and memory's powerful." Eli's gaze drifted toward the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening beneath the amber glow of the lamps. "You know," he said after a while, "I used to believe that too. That music could heal anything. Then, life proved me wrong." Johnny leaned back, eyes steady. "Or maybe life's been waiting for you to prove it right again." Eli laughed softly, but this time it wasn't bitter. It was weary, unsure, but alive. Something in the way they spoke, the quiet conviction they carried, chipped at the shell of defeat around him. "You two are strange," he said finally. "Most people walk past me like I don't exist." Keanu's reply came softly. "Most people don't know what they're missing." The clock above the counter ticked past 1 in the morning, but no one moved to leave. The night had settled into something deeper, a quiet understanding forming in the spaces between their words. Keanu stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, the spoon clinking against the mug. The sound seemed to echo the rhythm of the rain outside. Eli sat across from him, staring at the window as droplets slid down the glass like slow tears. Johnny leaned back, silent, studying the man whose story had slowly unfolded, between sips of coffee and long pauses. After a while, Keanu spoke. "Eli, when you played tonight, I didn't hear failure. I heard someone who's still fighting." Eli shook his head. "Fighting what? Ghosts? There's nothing left to win. The music took everything from me." Johnny leaned forward. "No, it didn't. Life did. The music's just waiting for you to come back." Eli rubbed his eyes. "You sound like you actually believe that." Keanu's tone stayed calm. "I do." They fell quiet again. Outside, the diner lights reflected on wet asphalt, shimmering like faint stage lights on a forgotten floor. Johnny's mind raced with half-formed ideas, but he didn't speak them yet. He could feel something shifting between them, a sense of possibility hidden beneath years of ruin. When the waitress passed by, Keanu asked for another round of coffee. She refilled their cups and gave Eli an extra slice of pie on the house. He stared at it for a long time before, whispering, "Haven't had pie in years." Johnny smiled. "Then, it's about time." Eli picked up his fork, hesitating. "You guys don't owe me this kindness." Keanu answered softly, "We're not doing it because we owe you. We're doing it because someone should have done it sooner." That silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was human. The kind that fills the space between people learning to trust again. Johnny's hand went instinctively to his wallet, but Keanu reached across the table and gently stopped him. Their eyes met in quiet understanding. "Not charity," Keanu said firmly. "Let's give him something real. A reason to play again." Johnny studied him for a moment, then nodded. They both knew what that meant. It wasn't about handing out money or pity. It was about handing back purpose. Eli looked between them, puzzled. "What are you two talking about?" Johnny shrugged with a grin. "Just a crazy thought." Keanu smiled slightly. "We've both lived long enough to know that crazy thoughts sometimes change lives." Eli laughed softly, the first honest laugh of the night. "Well, good luck changing mine. I've been stuck in this loop for over a decade." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "Then it's time to break it." The rain eased outside, leaving the city glistening under the late-night glow. The hum of traffic had quieted, replaced by the rhythmic drip from the awning. The world felt paused, as if waiting for something new to begin. Keanu rose, placing a few bills on the table for their meal. "We'll come back tomorrow," he said simply. "Same time." Eli looked confused. "Tomorrow? Why?" Johnny stood beside Keanu, his voice lighter, but full of quiet determination. "Because you've got music to play, man, and we're not done listening." Eli blinked, speechless. Before he could respond, they were already heading toward the door. He watched as the bell above it jingled softly, and the burr. Two men stepped back into the night. The wind caught the edge of Keanu's coat as he turned to look back once more. For just a moment, their eyes met through the glass. Eli's tired and lost. Keanu's calm and certain. Then they were gone, swallowed by the neon and the hum of the city. Eli sat there for a long time, staring at the empty booth, the half-eaten slice of pie, and the guitar leaning against the wall. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that maybe, just maybe, this night wasn't the end of his story. After all, outside, under the weak streetlight, Keanu and Johnny walked in silence. Finally, Johnny spoke. "You serious about this?" Keanu's reply was steady, completely. Johnny nodded. "Then tomorrow, we start figuring out how to give that man back his stage." The quiet agreement settled between them like a promise. It wasn't spoken again, but it didn't need to be. Some vows are made not with words, but with the certainty of hearts that recognize a soul worth saving. The following morning, New York was cold and gray. The streets were slick from the night's rain, steam rising from the grates in little bursts that vanished into the wind. Keanu walked beside Johnny along the same street where they had met Eli. The diner lights were still off. The corner coffee stand just opening. The spot by the subway vent was empty. The crate was gone. So was the man. Johnny looked around, frowning. "He said he'd be here." Keanu scanned the street quietly, his gaze steady. Maybe he moved on. People on the street don't stay in one place too long. Johnny nodded but didn't move. Something about the emptiness of that corner unsettled him. He kicked at a bottle cap, sending it skittering across the wet pavement. "We should ask around." They crossed the street to a newspaper vendor who was setting up his stand. The man looked up, surprised to see two famous faces standing there in plain clothes. Johnny asked, "Hey, have you seen a guy who plays guitar around here? Older? Maybe 50? Gray hair? Beat-up instrument?" The vendor squinted. "You talking about Eli?" "Yeah. He drifts around. Usually shows up here at night. Mornings he's over by St. Bridget's Church on 9th Avenue. They serve breakfast to folks who need it." Keanu gave a small nod. "Thank you." As they started walking again, Johnny muttered, "Man, this city hides 1,000 stories like his. You could walk past a legend and never know." Keanu's reply was soft. "That's why we came back." They reached 9th Avenue a half hour later. The morning rush had started. Cabs blaring horns, people moving fast, heads down. Amid the chaos, a modest stone church stood between two tall buildings, its doors open. A line of people stretched along the sidewalk, waiting for soup and bread. Keanu and Johnny split up, scanning faces. Some recognized them and whispered in surprise, but neither actor seemed to notice. Keanu searched near the steps while Johnny moved toward the back of the line. For a while, nothing. Just tired faces and shuffling feet. Then, at the far end, wrapped in a gray blanket and hunched against the wind, Johnny saw him, Eli Turner. The same old guitar case rested beside his feet, the handle taped, the fabric damp from rain. Johnny approached slowly. "Eli?" The man looked up, startled. For a second, his eyes didn't recognize the voice. Then they widened. "You again?" Johnny smiled. "Told you we'd find you." Eli blinked, half amused, half confused. "Didn't think you meant it." Johnny grinned. "We're stubborn like that." Keanu appeared moments later, relief crossing his usually calm face. "We've been looking for you." Eli shook his head, clutching the blanket tighter. "Didn't think anyone would." Keanu reached out a hand. "Come on, let's get you somewhere warm." Eli hesitated, glancing toward the church doorway where volunteers handed out bowls of soup. His breath came out in small clouds in the cold air. "I can't just walk away from the line. Some of these folks have been here since dawn." Johnny looked toward the volunteers and then back at him. "We'll bring you back after. Promise." Eli gave a doubtful laugh. "You two don't seem like the type to hang around soup kitchens." Keanu smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised." For a long moment, Eli studied them, trying to read their sincerity. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but I ain't leaving this guitar." He picked up the case, holding it close like a fragile secret. The three walked together through the damp streets, steam rising around their shoes as taxis splashed through puddles. The morning light was weak, filtering between tall buildings like a hesitant sunrise. Johnny bought them coffee from a cart, handing Eli a cup with both hands to steady his trembling grip. "Drink slow," he said. "You look half frozen." Eli took a careful sip and sighed, the warmth seeming to wake him a little. "Didn't think I'd see you again, honestly. Thought maybe I'd dreamed that diner conversation." Keanu looked at him. It was real. They stopped outside a small corner diner, one that smelled of bacon and fresh bread, its windows fogged from the heat inside. Johnny pushed the door open and gestured for Eli to go first. The waitress gave them a puzzled look, but led them to a booth in the back, away from the chatter. When the coffee came, Eli wrapped his hands around the mug like it was a lifeline. Johnny leaned forward. "We wanted to talk more about your music, about what it meant to you before everything changed." Eli stared into his cup for a long moment before answering. "Back then, music was like breathing. I didn't have to think about it. It just came out of me. I used to play for people who'd close their eyes and forget their troubles. Made me feel like I was doing something that mattered. But after I lost them, every note started to hurt. It wasn't sound anymore. It was memory." Keanu nodded slowly, his tone gentle. "And now?" Eli gave a tired smile. "Now it's just something I do so I don't disappear completely. A man's got to hear himself to know he's still alive." Johnny glanced at Keanu, his expression heavy with understanding. He knew what it was to use art as survival to keep from falling apart. "Eli, what if you could play for people again?" he asked carefully. Eli shook his head. "You mean on the street?" "No," Johnny said softly. "For real. Somewhere you belong." Eli's laugh came quick and hollow. "Belong? That's a word I buried a long time ago." Keanu leaned in, his voice calm but full of quiet conviction. "You didn't bury it. You just forgot where you left it." Eli looked up, startled by the intensity in his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversations, the hiss of the coffee machine all faded into a muted hum around them. Then Eli exhaled shakily and whispered, "You two are crazy." Johnny smiled. "Yeah, but we're right." Eli rubbed his hands together, staring down at the steam curling from his mug. "You talk like people still care about the kind of music I played. They don't. The world moved on." Keanu leaned back, his expression patient. Maybe the world didn't move on. Maybe it just got louder. Eli frowned slightly, unsure what to say. Johnny tapped the table lightly. "Noise fades. Real sound stays. You still have that." Eli's laugh was soft, but unsteady. "You're both dreamers." Keanu smiled. "Maybe, but dreams built everything worth saving." The words sank deep. Eli stared out the diner window at the gray street, watching umbrellas drift past, like slow-moving ghosts. He thought about the tiny bar he once played in, the smoky lights, the crowd that used to lean in when his solos began. He remembered his wife's smile, his daughter's clapping hands. The ache in his chest deepened, but beneath it, something stirred. He looked back at the two men sitting across from him. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Johnny hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Because we've both seen what happens when good people get forgotten, and maybe we're a little tired of watching it happen." Eli swallowed hard, the tension in his shoulders loosening. "You really think I could stand on a stage again?" Keanu nodded. "I don't think. I know." For the first time since they'd met, Eli's eyes shone with something other than weariness. He reached down, touching the edge of his guitar case. "She's seen better days. The neck's splitting, frets are uneven, but she still sings when I let her." Johnny smiled. "Then we'll make sure she sings somewhere worth hearing." Eli blinked, trying to understand what they were planning. "You're serious?" Keanu's voice was calm but resolute. "Completely." The waitress came by to refill their cups, her eyes widening when she recognized the two actors. Johnny just grinned and slipped a few bills under the check before she could say anything. When she left, Keanu turned back to Eli. "We'll start small, a place that feels like home. You just need to remember what it feels like to play, because you want to." Eli's throat tightened. "It's been so long. I don't even know if my hands remember." Johnny pointed to the guitar beside him. "Then we'll find out." Outside, the clouds began to break. A faint glow touched the edges of the wet buildings, turning the puddles into silver pools. Eli watched the light reflect off the window, and for a fleeting second, the city didn't look so heavy anymore. He smiled, a small, hesitant curve of the lips that hadn't surfaced in years. "If I crash and burn, you two are buying the drinks after." Keanu chuckled softly. "Deal." As they left the diner together, the noise of the city greeted them once more, but this time, it didn't drown Eli out. The hum of taxis, the footsteps, the street chatter, it all blended into a rhythm he hadn't heard in years. A pulse, a beginning. Keanu fell into step beside him, voice low but steady. "Music used to mean something, right?" Eli nodded. "Yeah." Keanu smiled. "It still does. You just forgot how much." Eli didn't answer, but the way he held his guitar a little tighter said enough. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't walking alone. They sat together again at the same diner 2 days later, the air warmer this time, sunlight spilling through the fogged glass. Eli looked a little better, his beard trimmed, hair combed back, the gray still there but more alive than before. Johnny had brought him a clean jacket, and Keanu had picked up a new set of guitar strings from a music shop on Broadway. Eli turned the small paper package in his hands, almost reverently. "Haven't put on new strings in years," he said quietly. "Forgot what it feels like to play something that sounds fresh." Keanu smiled. "Then maybe it's time to remember." They ordered lunch, though Eli barely touched his plate. He kept looking between the two men as if trying to figure out their angle. "You guys keep showing up," he said finally. "Why?" Johnny leaned back, taking a sip of coffee. "Because we're stubborn. And because there's something about you that feels unfinished." Eli laughed softly. "Unfinished. That's one way to put it." He looked down at his hands. "You can't just pick up where life left off. Some doors stay shut." Keanu shook his head. "Doors don't stay shut. People just forget how to knock." That line made Eli pause. He looked at Keanu for a long time, then gave a faint smile. "You talk like you've done this before." Keanu's eyes softened. "I've seen a lot of people get lost. Some never come back. I just don't think you're one of them." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The waitress refilled their cups, and outside, a street musician played a harmonica that bled faintly through the glass. Johnny tapped his fingers on the table in rhythm. "I've got an idea," he said finally. "What if we help him play again just once? A real gig. One night." Eli froze. "A gig? Are you kidding me?" Keanu leaned forward. "Not a big one. Something quiet. Something true. Eli laughed, shaking his head. Nobody wants to see a washed-up jazz man shake on stage. Johnny smirked. Maybe not, but they might want to see what honesty sounds like. Eli stared at him. Honesty doesn't sell tickets. Keanu's voice came low and steady. Maybe not, but it heals people. Eli looked away, struggling to find a response. The words hung between them, calm and immovable. Finally, he said, "Even if I said yes, where would we even play?" Johnny glanced at Keanu, a spark of mischief crossing his face. "Leave that to us." Eli stared at them both for a long time, then laughed under his breath. "You two sound like you're planning a miracle." Johnny grinned. "We've seen crazier things happen." Keanu's tone was quieter, almost reflective. "It's not about making you famous. It's about giving your music one more breath." Eli rubbed his forehead, half amused, half overwhelmed. "You don't get it. I haven't played for a real crowd since my daughter was alive. Every time I touch those strings, I see her face in the front row." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's exactly why you should play again." Eli frowned. "To hurt all over?" "No," Keanu said softly. "To finally let it mean something again." The silence that followed was heavy, but not hopeless. Eli took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "Even if I wanted to, who'd come? No one remembers my name. The world doesn't wait around for ghosts." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. Ghosts still make people feel something. Eli's eyes flicked toward him, the words striking deeper than he expected. He looked down, fingers tracing the rim of his mug. Johnny leaned back with a small smile. "There it is. That's your opening line. You're already halfway to your comeback speech." Eli shook his head, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Completely," Johnny said. "And we're not talking about some big public thing. No press, no cameras, just a night that's about you." Keanu nodded. "Redemption doesn't need an audience. It just needs truth." Eli looked out the window, where the late afternoon light caught the edges of the passing cars. His reflection stared back at him, tired, lined, but alive. "You two don't quit, do you?" Johnny smiled. "Not when it matters." By the time they left the diner, the sky had turned gold. They walked together down the busy street, their plan forming in quiet sentences between traffic lights and crosswalks. Johnny knew a few old sound engineers from his touring days, men who still worked in hidden corners of the music world. Keanu remembered a jazz bar downtown that used to host open sessions decades ago. That night they made calls. One contact led to another. Musicians remembered favors owed. One bar owner remembered Eli's name from the old days and promised to help if they could find the right space. By midnight, they had a short list of forgotten venues still, standing a few dusty lounges, an abandoned theater, a bar tucked behind a record store on the Lower East Side. Johnny sat on the edge of his hotel bed, scrolling through his phone. Half these places probably don't even have working amps anymore. Keanu was by the window, looking out at the skyline. "Then we'll fix them." Johnny looked up. "You mean it?" "I do," Keanu said quietly. "He's worth it." The conviction in his voice silenced the room. Outside, the city glowed like a restless heartbeat. Somewhere within it, a man named Eli Turner had no idea that two strangers were rebuilding the stage he'd lost years ago. 2 days later, progress arrived with a phone call. Johnny was leaning against the hood of a parked car outside the hotel, scrolling through his contacts when an old name popped up: Mickey Lang, a sound engineer who used to work jazz nights in the 80s. Johnny dialed, and within minutes, Mickey's gruff voice came through the line. "Depp? Haven't heard from you in years. You still breathing or what?" Johnny laughed. "Barely. Listen, I need a favor. You still know any old-school bars with working sound systems?" Mickey hesitated. "You looking for a gig?" "Not for me. For someone who deserves one." There was a pause. followed by a sigh. "You remember the blue lantern down on Delancey?" Johnny straightened. "The one with the neon sax sign?" "Yeah. It's still standing barely. The owner's a stubborn fool. Keeps the lights on for ghosts, I think." Johnny smiled. "Then we found our place." He hung up and headed back inside, where Keanu was pacing, phone in hand. "Got it," Johnny said. "The blue lantern. Still open." Keanu's calm face brightened, just slightly. "Perfect." That night, they visited the bar. The Blue Lantern sat wedged between a pawn shop and an old record store, its sign half burned out but still humming faintly blue. Inside, the air smelled of wood polish and dust. Old posters of jazz legends lined the walls. Coltrane, Davis, Parker, and in the corner, a small stage waited beneath a cracked spotlight. The owner, a wiry man named Russell, came out wiping his hands on a rag. When he saw who had walked in, his eyes nearly doubled in size. "Wait, are you?" Keanu raised a hand modestly. "Just two guys looking to rent your stage for a private night." Russell blinked. "You could rent Carnegie Hall if you wanted. Why here?" Johnny smiled. "Because this place still remembers what music sounds like." The old man studied them, then gave a slow nod. "You're welcome to it. You'll have to clean up a bit, though. Haven't had a live set in months." Keanu ran a hand across the worn wood of the bar top. "We'll take care of everything." They walked the space together, imagining what it might look like with lights and laughter again. The silence felt expectant, as if even the walls recognized what was coming. When they stepped back into the cool night, Johnny exhaled deeply. "This is it." Keanu nodded, his gaze steady on the glowing sign. "Now all we need," he said quietly, "is to help Eli believe it." The next week became a quiet mission. Each morning, Keanu and Johnny checked in on Eli at a modest hotel near the edge of downtown. They'd booked him a small room, clean sheets, running hot water, and a window that looked out over the city skyline. For a man who'd slept under concrete for years, it felt unreal. Eli stood near the window the first morning, his fingers grazing the curtains like he didn't believe they were real. "Feels strange," he murmured. "Too quiet. I keep thinking someone's gonna knock and tell me this was a mistake." Keanu placed a brown paper bag on the table. Inside was breakfast from the same diner, scrambled eggs, toast, and a fresh apple. "No mistake," he said simply. "Just a new start." Johnny sat on the edge of the sard, chair by the door. "You need to start practicing again, man. The show's coming fast." Eli chuckled nervously. "You say that like I've got fans waiting outside." Johnny grinned. "Maybe not yet, but they'll come. Trust me." He opened a guitar case resting against the wall. Inside was a brand new instrument, rich mahogany finish, polished frets, the strings gleaming under the morning light. Eli froze, his breath catching. "You didn't," he whispered. Johnny smiled faintly. "You can't rewrite your past, but you can play your way out of it." Eli reached out and lifted the guitar with trembling hands. The first chord came out rough, off-key, his fingers stiff from disuse. He tried again, but the sound cracked, and frustration crossed his face. "Guess the world forgot me, and my hands did too." Keanu moved closer, his tone even and steady. "Healing isn't linear. You don't get better all at once. You just show up every day until something shifts." Eli looked at him, eyes tired but searching. "And what if nothing shifts?" Keanu smiled gently. "Then we keep showing up anyway." For days, they repeated that ritual. Johnny brought meals and stories, keeping the room filled with laughter and light. Keanu sat quietly in the corner, listening as Eli struggled through scales, his hands shaking more from memory than weakness. Each note was a war fought in silence. Some days the sound barely resembled music. Others, it touched something raw and human. At night, when the city outside hummed with restless energy, Eli would sit by the window, staring at the skyline, the guitar resting on his lap. Some part of him wanted to believe he could still climb back to the man he once was. But the voice of doubt, the one that had lived in his head for years, kept whispering that redemption wasn't for men like him. Eli's hands trembled again the next morning. The sound that came from the guitar was uneven, a half-remembered melody, gasping for life. He muttered under his breath, angry at himself. I used to make this thing sing. Now I sound like a beginner. Johnny sat across from him, arms folded, watching quietly. You're not a beginner. You're just rusty. There's a difference. Eli gritted his teeth. Rust never shines again. Keanu, who'd been tuning the small practice amp they'd borrowed, looked up. It can. It just needs patience. Eli stopped playing. Patience is for people who still have time. Keanu's tone softened. Eli stopped him. 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 Eli, you've got more time than you think. The fact that you're still breathing means your song isn't done yet. Eli set the guitar aside, his shoulders tense. You sound so sure, like you know something I don't. Keanu gave a small nod. I know what it's like to think the world's moved on without you. Eli looked at him sharply. You? You've got everything a man could want. Keanu didn't flinch. Everything isn't the same as peace. Words landed like a stone in still water. Johnny stayed quiet, watching the exchange, knowing that Keanu's calm came from scars he rarely spoke of. Eli's expression shifted, curiosity breaking through his bitterness. You ever lose something that made you stop believing? Keanu's gaze fell for a moment. Yes. Eli waited for more, but none came. He didn't need to ask. The silence said enough. He nodded slowly, then picked the guitar back up. The next chord came out cleaner. He closed his eyes, trying again. For a moment, the tremor in his fingers eased. Johnny grinned. There it is. Eli stopped playing and looked down at his hands. You think I'll ever get it back? Keanu leaned forward, voice gentle but certain. You never lost it. You just forgot where you left it. That night, they stayed late. The city glowed outside the hotel window, neon lights painting streaks across the glass. Eli practiced until his fingertips burned, pushing through the pain. Johnny fetched water and cracked jokes, trying to lighten the weight in the room. Keanu watched quietly, offering small words of encouragement. When Eli's confidence began to waver, when midnight came, Eli set the guitar down and rubbed his eyes. I don't know if I can do this. Every time I start, I remember the crash, the sirens, my little girl's face. Keanu moved closer, his voice barely above a whisper. That memory isn't here to hurt you anymore. It's here to guide you. Eli swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. Guide me where? To peace, Keanu said softly. And maybe to the stage again. Eli looked away, unable to answer, but when he lifted the guitar again, his hands didn't shake quite as much. Eli woke to the sound of rain tapping against the hotel window. The city below shimmered under the streetlights, blurred by mist. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the guitar leaning against the wall. The new strings gleamed faintly in the dim light. He picked it up, tried to play a soft chord, but his hands betrayed him. The tremor returned, small at first, then growing until the notes dissolved into silence. He cursed under his breath and set the instrument down too fast. The sound echoed against the thin walls. A moment later, there was a knock at the door. Keanu stepped inside, calm as ever, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Eli shook his head. Can't play either. Feels like my body's forgotten what music is. Keanu handed him one of the cups and sat beside him. Your body remembers. It's your mind that's still catching up. Eli took a sip, staring at the dark surface of the coffee. You talk like I've still got something left to offer. You do, Keanu said softly. You just stopped believing it. Eli rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. You don't get it. Every time I touch that guitar, I see their faces. I hear the crash again. I don't deserve to. Walk back on a stage. Not after what I did to them. Keanu stayed silent for a long time before speaking. You didn't do anything to them. Life did. You love them. You miss them. That's what this is about. Eli's shoulders trembled. You think music's gonna fix that? No, Keanu said quietly. But it might help you live with it. Eli turned away, blinking fast. The words cut deeper than he expected. He whispered, maybe I'm not worth saving. Keanu placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Everyone deserves music again, especially the ones who lost it. That broke something open inside him. Eli's breath hitched, and he tried to hide his face. But the tears came anyway, raw, silent, uncontrollable. Keanu said nothing more, just sat beside him, letting the moment breathe. The sound of rain filled the room again, soft and rhythmic, like the quiet pulse of an old song waiting to be rediscovered. Johnny arrived an hour later, guitar in hand, the morning sun beginning to pierce through the clouds. He saw the empty coffee cups, the redness around Eli's eyes, and understood without asking. He placed the guitar gently in Eli's lap and said, "Then let's start from the beginning." This time, when Eli strummed, the note was steady, fragile, but true. And when he lifted his head, there was something new in his eyes, something Keanu and Johnny had been waiting to see. Belief. The next few weeks passed in slow, deliberate rhythm. Every day, Keanu or Johnny stopped by to check on Eli. The hotel room no longer smelled of cigarettes, and to spare it smelled of coffee, soap, and clean air. Keanu had helped him enroll in a private rehabilitation program under an anonymous sponsor. Eli didn't know it was Keanu's doing, but he suspected. He didn't ask. He wasn't ready to thank him yet. Each morning, the program sent a counselor to meet him, guiding him through detox and therapy. The process was rough. Some days, Eli was irritable and restless. Other days, he seemed distant, as if his mind were somewhere between regret and redemption. But every time he felt himself slipping, he'd look at the new guitar leaning by the window and remember why he started again. One afternoon, Johnny showed up carrying a small duffel bag. "I brought someone," he said, stepping aside to reveal a man in his 50s with silver hair and calloused hands. "Eli, this is Mark Daniels. We used to tour together. He's one of the best guitar techs I know." Mark smiled warmly. "Heard you've got a pair of hands that used to make wood and wire do magic." Eli laughed nervously. "Used to is right. These days I'm lucky if I can hold a chord." Mark sat across from him, unzipping the bag to reveal tuning tools and a few spare strings. "Then, let's start there. Magic can wait." For hours, they worked together. Mark guided Eli through exercises, simple scales, finger stretches, and tuning drills. His patience reminded Eli of the first teacher he ever had. Johnny sat nearby, offering encouragement, while Keanu quietly filmed snippets on his phone, not for publicity, but to show Eli how far he'd come. When Eli's hands began to steady, he strummed an old blues progression. The notes wavered but held their shape. It was the first time the sound filled the room with something close to music. Johnny grinned. "There it is. That's your heartbeat coming back." Eli smiled faintly. "Feels weird, like meeting an old friend I forgot I missed." Keanu stopped recording and looked at him. "That's exactly what it is." He turned the phone toward Eli, showing him the video. The man on the screen looked fragile but determined, eyes focused on every movement. "See this," Keanu said quietly. "That's what courage looks like." Eli stared at the clip for a long moment, emotion rising in his chest. For the first time in years, he saw himself as something other than broken. Mark visited again the next morning, bringing a small amp and a worn notebook filled with chord charts. Eli sat at the table, eyes clear but tired, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Feels strange having people bet on a man who fell off the map." Johnny grinned. "We're not betting, we're investing." Eli chuckled, shaking his head. "Investing in what?" Keanu answered quietly. "In truth. You've still got it. You just need to remember how to let it out." Mark set up the amp and motioned for Eli to pick up the guitar. "Let's start slow," he said. "You're rebuilding muscle memory, not chasing perfection." Eli's fingers found the frets, clumsy at first, but more confident than before. He followed Mark's steady rhythm, strumming softly, each note carrying a mix of pain and persistence. The tone filled the room, shaky yet alive. Sweat gathered on his forehead, but he didn't stop. When the last chord faded, he looked up with a breathless laugh. "Guess the rust's not as thick as I thought." Johnny clapped once, smiling wide. "You see, that's what I'm talking about. Right there, that's the sound of someone coming back." Keanu leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching with quiet pride. The old shadows in Eli's eyes seemed to lift, replaced by a faint spark of purpose. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the beginning of something solid. Later that afternoon, Keanu drove Eli to an empty sound studio downtown. The space was small, lined with acoustic panels and old mixing equipment. A single microphone stood in the center, surrounded by silence. Eli hesitated at the doorway. "It's been a long time since I've stood in a room like this." Keanu smiled. "Then it's about time." Johnny helped him unpack the guitar and adjust the stool. The three stood together in the soft, golden light streaming through the high windows. Eli placed his fingers on the strings and began to play simple scales. The sound echoed gently across the studio walls. Each note was uneven, but real proof of persistence. Keanu pulled out his phone again, recording quietly as Eli moved from scale to melody. It wasn't a song yet, but it was music. Real, trembling, human music. When Eli finally stopped, the room hung in a heavy silence before Johnny said softly, "That right there, that's what second chances sound like." Eli exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping. "You guys really think I can do this again?" Keanu's answer was calm but firm. "You already are." Eli came back to the studio every day that week. The first few sessions were slow, his hands stiff and uncooperative. But by the fourth day, the change was visible. His grip steadied, the tremor faded, and his sound began to carry a quiet confidence. He started humming as he played, half-forgotten tunes rising from somewhere deep inside him. Johnny sometimes joined in, tapping along on a small wooden box drum. The room that once felt like an echo chamber now breathed with life again. Between breaks, Eli sat on a stool by the window, watching the sun slip between tall buildings. He ran his thumb along the guitar's edge and said, "You know, when I first lost them, I thought the music died too. Every sound felt like a wound." Keanu, seated nearby, looked up. "And now?" Eli smiled faintly. "Now it feels like a way to talk to them again." Johnny nodded. "Then you're finally speaking the language they left you." The three men shared a quiet moment. No one rushed it. No one needed to. The air inside the studio was heavy with memory, but also with hope. Eli began to play a soft blues riff, raw but full of heart. The notes filled the room like a conversation. Pain turned into melody, regret turned into rhythm. When he finished, Keanu walked over and handed him a bottle of water. "You did good," he said simply. "Really good." Eli smiled. wiping sweat from his brow. "You think that clip you recorded earlier could help me keep going?" Keanu nodded. "That's why I filmed it. Not to post, not to share, just for you. For the days when you forget how far you've come." He showed Eli the short video again, the one where his hands first found steady rhythm after years of silence. Eli watched it carefully, his jaw tightening with emotion. In that reflection, he didn't see the man who had lost everything. He saw the one who had refused to quit. "That guy looks stronger than I remember," Eli said softly. Johnny smiled. "That's because he is." Eli set the phone down, shaking his head with quiet disbelief. "You two have no idea what this means to me. I thought I'd never feel this again." Keanu gave a small smile. "You don't need to thank us. Just promise you'll keep showing up." Eli looked around the studio, his eyes glimmering in the afternoon light. "I'll show up," he said, "every day, until I can play like I used to, or better." Johnny stood, stretching. "That's the spirit. And who knows, maybe we'll find a place that remembers your sound." Keanu's expression softened into something warm, almost fatherly. "We already have." Eli frowned slightly. "You mean," Johnny grinned, "the Blue Lantern, still standing, still waiting for its ghost to come home." For a moment, Eli couldn't speak. The name hit him, like a note from a distant memory. He remembered smoky nights, brass laughter, and applause that once shook the walls. He blinked hard, fighting back the tears. "I thought that place was gone." Keanu placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "It's not. And soon, neither will your music be." Eli's breath trembled, but this time, it wasn't from weakness. It was the sound of a man coming back to life. The three of them stood there in the fading light, no longer strangers bound by coincidence, but brothers, healing men who had found, in each other, a way to start over. The city began to change around Eli, though maybe it was him who was changing. Weeks slipped quietly into months, and each sunrise brought a little more color into his life. The trembling in his hands faded. His eyes, once dull and hollow, began to hold light again. He'd stopped drinking, started walking every morning, and even got a small notebook to write lyrics in. Keanu and Johnny visited whenever their schedules allowed. They brought groceries, music magazines, and laughter. Johnny once joked that Eli was starting to look more like a musician and less like a ghost. "Don't ruin it," Eli shot back with a grin, rubbing his freshly shaved chin. "I worked hard for this face." Keanu smiled quietly, watching the subtle transformation unfold. He'd seen people recover before, but never quite like this. Never with this much humility. One morning, he drove Eli to a local arts program on the Upper West Side. The small nonprofit helped homeless artists rebuild their portfolios, offering grants, mentorship, and a creative space to start again. The director, a woman named Claire, shook Eli's hand warmly. "We've been hearing about you," she said, "a jazz guitarist with a story to tell." Eli looked at the floor, embarrassed. "Just trying to find my rhythm again." Claire smiled. "Then you're in the right place." The studio was full of canvases, guitars, and small fan recording booths. Eli ran his hand along the walls as though touching the heartbeat of something familiar. Keanu stood near the door, quietly observing. "You belong here," he said softly. Eli swallowed hard. "I don't know if I deserve it." Keanu shook his head. "You don't have to deserve a second chance. You just have to take it." Over the next several weeks, Eli worked tirelessly. He joined evening workshops, performed small sets for other recovering artists, and started teaching younger players how to find emotion in a note instead of perfection. The more he gave, the more his old confidence returned. It wasn't arrogance, it was peace. Johnny showed up one evening carrying a set of apartment keys. "Got you a place," he said casually, tossing them onto the table. "Tiny but close to Central Park. And before you start arguing, it's a loan from one artist to another. Eli froze, the weight of gratitude tightening his chest. You two don't stop, do you? Keanu smiled. Not when it comes to finishing what we started. Spring crept softly into New York. The air felt different, lighter, gentler, and Eli felt it too. His days now followed a rhythm of music, reflection, and recovery. He took morning walks through Central Park, stopping by the lake, where street performers played jazz on weekends. Sometimes he joined them, keeping his hat low, letting the music speak instead of his name. People would clap, not knowing the man before them was once a lost musician, rediscovering his place in the world. Johnny stopped by one afternoon, sunglasses perched on his head, 2 takeout boxes in hand. "You look alive," he said as Eli opened the door. Eli laughed. "You mean I finally look human again?" "Better than that," Johnny said, dropping the boxes on the table. "You look like someone who's got songs to write." Eli reached for his notebook, flipping through pages of messy handwriting and crossed-out verses. "Working on something new?" he said quietly. "A song called Lantern Light." Johnny leaned forward. "That's a strong title. It's about finding your way out," Eli said. "You know, after everything's gone dark. It's not about fame or fortune, just gratitude." Johnny nodded slowly. "Sounds like your story." Keanu arrived a few minutes later, his calm presence grounding the room instantly. Eli grabbed his guitar, sat by the window, and began to play. The melody was soft and slow, with touches of sorrow wrapped in hope. His voice, weathered but honest, carried through the apartment with a raw kind of beauty that made Johnny stop mid-bite. When the final chord faded, Keanu said quietly, "That's your stage comeback." Eli looked down at his guitar. "You think people will listen?" Keanu smiled. "They'll feel it." "That's better." The next few weeks were filled with preparation. The Blue Lantern had been booked for a private evening. Nothing flashy. No headlines. No press. Just friends, local musicians, and a handful of people from the recovery program. The owner had dusted off the old stage lights, and Mark, Johnny's friend, agreed to handle the soundboard. It would be simple but honest, the way music was meant to be. Eli trained every day, his calluses returning, his voice gaining strength. He wrote verses late into the night, tapping his pen against the kitchen table while the city hummed outside. The apartment Johnny had loaned him became a small sanctuary of rhythm and renewal. Sometimes, he'd catch himself smiling at nothing, realizing he was happy without knowing exactly when it happened. One night, sitting with Keanu on the small balcony, Eli said softly, "You two didn't just save me. You reminded me I still exist." Keanu looked at him, his tone measured, but full of warmth. "We didn't do anything you couldn't have done for someone else. You just needed someone to play backup while you found your melody." Again, Eli laughed quietly, gazing at the city lights below. "I hope someday I can do the same for someone." "You will," Keanu said. "That's what this is all about, passing it forward." Eli nodded, the weight of that truth settling deep in his chest. He looked down at his guitar resting beside him, its wood gleaming under the balcony light. "You know," he said softly, "for years I thought music was the thing that ruined me. Turns out, it's what brought me back." Keanu smiled, the faintest spark in his eyes. "That's the beauty of it. The same light that burns you can also guide you home." Eli leaned back in his chair, letting the wind carry the sound of distant traffic like a faint rhythm beneath their conversation. The world, once harsh and loud, now felt like a song finally resolving to its right key. The Blue Lantern glowed softly against the evening rain. Its neon sign, cracked at the edges, hummed faintly like a relic from another time. Inside, the bar was washed in warm amber light, the kind that made everyone look gentler, kinder. Tables were filled with familiar faces, musicians from the recovery program, a few veterans from the shelter, and a handful of locals who'd heard whispers of the night's performer. No reporters, no flashing cameras. Just people who understood what second chances meant. Keanu and Johnny slipped in quietly, choosing a small table at the back near the wall. They didn't want attention, and they didn't need it. Their work tonight was done. Now, it was Eli's turn to step into the light. The air smelled of polished wood and faint whiskey. Conversations softened when the stage lights dimmed, replaced by a hush of anticipation. Eli stood behind the curtain, his new guitar in hand. His fingers ran along the polished fretboard, feeling the warmth of the wood beneath his skin. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. He wasn't sure if it was excitement or fear, maybe both. Johnny approached from the side, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You ready, old man?" Eli gave a nervous smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good," Johnny said, "because it's your night." Keanu appeared behind him, steady and quiet. "Remember, it's not about proving anything," he said softly. "It's about sharing what's already true." Eli nodded. "You two sure you don't want to sit up front?" Keanu shook his head. "The front's for the story. We're just the audience." Eli smiled, taking one last deep breath before stepping into the light. The murmur of voices faded as he appeared on stage. The sight of him drew a low ripple of surprise. Some recognized him instantly, the man they'd seen busking on street corners, now standing upright beneath a single spotlight. Others simply felt the weight of the moment, without needing to know the backstory. He adjusted the microphone, the sound of his fingers brushing against the cord audible in the stillness. For a second, he just looked out at the faces before him, unsure where to begin. Then he said quietly, "It's been a while." A few soft chuckles broke the tension. "This song's called Lantern Light. It's for the people who remind you that home isn't a place. It's the ones who find you in the dark." The crowd went silent. Eli strummed the first chord. The sound wavered but settled quickly into rhythm. His voice followed raspy, imperfect, yet rich with feeling. Each line carried years of pain, gratitude, and release. The melody flowed like a confession wrapped in hope. From the back table, Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. Johnny watched with a grin slowly spreading across his face. Halfway through the song, Eli's hands stopped shaking. The fear dissolved into focus. His fingers danced across the strings as though they'd been waiting all this time to return home. Eli closed his eyes as the final verse began. The lyrics carried memories: his wife's laughter, his daughter's voice, the sound of rain against the old apartment window. But this time, those memories didn't crush him. They lifted him. The pain was still there, but it had turned into something cleaner, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The audience listened, in complete silence. Not a glass clinked, not a chair moved. They felt it too, the redemption in every note. The quiet miracle of a man rediscovering his song. When the last chord rang out, it hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Eli let the sound fade naturally, then whispered, "Thank you," before stepping back from the mic. For a moment, the room remained perfectly still. Then, the applause erupted. It wasn't polite, it was thunderous. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. The sound filled the small bar until the walls seemed to vibrate with it. Eli stood frozen, overwhelmed, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a marathon. He wasn't used to being seen. Not like this, not for pity, but for purpose. Johnny's eyes glistened as he clapped along with everyone else. Keanu stayed seated, quiet, smiling faintly. He didn't need to shout or stand. He could see everything he needed to, in the way Eli bowed his head, humbled and grateful, tears shining beneath the lights. Eli looked up and met Keanu's gaze from across the room. The noise around them disappeared. In that single look was everything they'd been, through the streets, the struggle, The sleepless nights of doubt. Keanu nodded once, as if to say, "You did it." Eli nodded back, unable to speak. The crowd finally began to settle, though the energy lingered like a heartbeat that refused to slow down. A few musicians approached the stage to shake Eli's hand, their faces filled with admiration. The bar owner, Russell, stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "You just brought this place back to life," he said. "That song, what was it called again?" Eli smiled through his tears. "Lantern Light." Russell grinned. "Then you lit the whole room, my friend." Laughter and applause followed, but Eli hardly heard it. He turned toward the back table where Keanu and Johnny stood. Johnny raised his glass in salute. Keanu gave a small, proud smile. Eli touched the body of his guitar gently, almost reverently, then whispered, "Guess I'm home again." He stepped off the stage and into the crowd. People reached out to pat his shoulder, to thank him for the song. It wasn't celebrity, they didn't care about his name. They cared about the feeling he'd given them, the truth he'd shared, and that was enough. As Keanu and Johnny made their way toward the door, Eli's laughter carried behind them a real, unguarded laugh that sounded like the first clear note of a brand new melody. Outside, the rain had stopped. The blue glow of the old neon sign shimmered across the wet pavement, reflecting the light back upward, as though the city itself was applauding. Keanu looked up at it and said quietly, "Lantern Light." Johnny smiled. "Yeah," he said, "it fits." The video went up the same night. No one in the Blue Lantern noticed when it happened. A young woman near the front table, her phone resting against a half-empty glass, had pressed record as Eli began to play Lantern Light. She never meant for it to become anything more than a personal memory. But when she re-watched it later, the emotion was too real to keep to herself. She uploaded it with a simple caption. "Two legends helped a lost musician find his way back." By morning, the clip had spread like wildfire. The shaky footage showed Eli sitting under the soft amber light, his voice trembling through the first verse before growing into something powerful and raw. At the back of Tenter, the room, the camera caught two shadowed figures, Keanu Reeves and Johnny Depp, watching quietly, smiling like proud brothers. The sound wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The truth in it was what the world heard. Within hours, hashtags began trending. People shared the story with disbelief and admiration. Keanu Reeves and Johnny Depp rescue forgotten jazz musician. The most beautiful comeback you'll hear this year. The world wanted to know who the man in the video was, the one whose voice sounded like pain turned to light. News outlets reached out to the Blue Lantern. They called, emailed, sent reporters to the bar, all trying to track down the musician and the two stars. The owner, Russell, smiled at the commotion but refused to give details. "Ask Eli," he told them. "It's his story." Eli, however, had no idea what was happening. He woke up the next morning to find his phone overflowing with messages from people he didn't know, old friends, former bandmates, even journalists. The first text he saw simply said, "You're trending." He frowned, scrolling through hundreds of notifications. Then, he saw the video. His voice filled the tiny screen, echoing back the night that had changed everything. The comments scrolled endlessly. "This made me cry. Hope sounds like this. The world needs more people like them." Eli sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the screen in disbelief. When he finally looked up, his reflection in the mirror didn't seem so broken anymore. Keanu and Johnny were already aware of the storm brewing online. Their phones had been ringing nonstop, flooded with requests for interviews, offers from late-night shows, and brand deals trying to turn a miracle into marketing. But neither man responded. Johnny silenced his phone and grinned. "Looks like the world finally caught up." Keanu shook his head gently. "Let it stay his. We were just there to hold the light." And that's exactly what they did. Every journalist who called received the same polite response through their publicists. No comment. Please contact Eli Turner. The days that followed felt like a dream. Eli couldn't quite believe was his. Messages poured in from across the world, producers, charity organizers, and fellow musicians who had once played beside him in smoky clubs decades ago. Everyone wanted to hear his story. But for Eli, it wasn't about fame anymore. It was about purpose. The world hadn't just listened to his song. It had felt it. He sat at the same diner where everything had started, phone in hand, scrolling through article after article. Headlines called his story a miracle. The comments were filled with gratitude, not gossip. This is what real kindness looks like. Music can still heal. If Keanu Reeves and Johnny Depp believe in second chances, maybe we all should. Across the table, Keanu watched him quietly. Johnny stirred his coffee, grinning. "You know you're famous again, right?" Eli shook his head. "Not for the same reason this time." Keanu smiled. "Exactly." A week later, invitations began to flood in. Charity concerts, community fundraisers, music festivals, everyone wanted Eli to perform. Not because he was trending, but because people believed in his story. One invitation came from a veteran shelter in New Jersey that was hosting a benefit for addiction recovery. The organizer wrote, "Your song, Lantern Light, became our anthem. It's helping people find their way back." When Eli read that message aloud, Johnny leaned back and said softly, "That's bigger than a comeback. That's legacy." They helped him prepare for his next event, a small charity concert at Lincoln Center, featuring local musicians recovering from hardship. Eli stood backstage before the show, the same guitar in his hands. This time, his nerves were different. He wasn't afraid of failing. He was afraid of not giving enough. When he stepped onto the stage, the lights were blinding, but the warmth of the audience carried him through. The first chord rang true. The crowd swayed, silent but connected. His voice had grown deeper, steadier, weathered by time but now free from doubt. Every lyric of Lantern Light became a message of survival for everyone who had ever been lost and found their way back. The applause afterward wasn't the roar of celebrity, it was gratitude. People stood, tears in their eyes, holding hands with strangers. Eli bowed deeply, his chest heaving with emotion. In that moment, he knew he'd never be the same. When the concert ended, Keanu and Johnny met him backstage. Eli laughed as he hugged them both, his voice cracking. "You two have no idea what you started." Johnny grinned. "You sure? Because I'm starting to think we created a legend." Keanu looked at him with quiet pride. "We didn't create it. We just reminded him it was still there." Outside, as the crowd dispersed, a group of young musicians waited near the entrance, holding signs that read, "Thank you, Eli." He walked over, signing a few guitars, shaking hands, listening to their stories. One boy, no older than 15, said, "I started playing again because of you." Eli placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and smiled. "Then promise me one thing, never let the music go dark." The boy nodded. "I won't." That night, as they drove through the city lights, Johnny looked out the window and said, "You realize this is going to live forever online." Keanu smiled faintly. "Good. The world needed this story." Eli leaned back in his seat, the skyline reflecting in his eyes. "No," he said softly. "The world needed to remember that kindness still plays the loudest note." Months passed, but Eli's story didn't fade. It evolved. The fame that had once seemed impossible became something he used gently, like a tool, never a trophy. Instead of chasing spotlight gigs or record deals, he spent his time in places the world rarely looked: homeless shelters, rehab centers, and community halls where hope felt thin. He began teaching again. The first time he stepped into a shelter with a small guitar case in hand, the room went quiet. A dozen men and women looked up from their folding chairs, unsure who he was. He smiled and said simply, "I'm not here to judge. I'm here to help you remember what sound feels like." At first, only a few stayed. Some didn't believe anyone cared enough to show up. But Eli came back the next day, and the next. Soon, the small group began to grow. He taught them basic chords, rhythm exercises, and breathing techniques. More importantly, he taught them patience. Music isn't about playing the right note, he said, one afternoon. It's about letting the wrong ones teach you something. His sessions became less like classes and more like conversations. People shared their stories between songs, stories of addiction, heartbreak, and survival. Eli listened, never interrupting, often strumming quietly as they spoke. When someone finished, he'd say, "That's your verse. Now let's find your melody." One morning, as he tuned a student's broken guitar, he looked up to see a familiar face at the back of the room. Keanu stood there, dressed in jeans and a black jacket, watching quietly. He didn't speak or draw attention. He just smiled as he listened to the group playing their clumsy, heartfelt tune. When the session ended, Eli walked over, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, wiping his hands. Keanu shrugged. "Didn't want to interrupt. You're doing good work." Eli laughed. "You mean we're doing good work? None of this would have happened without you." Keanu shook his head. "We didn't save you, Eli. You did that yourself." Eli smiled softly. "Maybe, but you gave me something I didn't have a reason to start again." They stood together in the quiet room, the sound of distant guitar strings still ringing faintly in the air. For Keanu, seeing Eli surrounded by people who'd once been as lost as he was felt like witnessing the full circle of redemption. For Eli, it was proof that kindness, once given, doesn't disappear. It multiplies. Eli's workshops began spreading beyond New York. Word of his quiet lessons traveled through social media, news outlets, and community boards. Soon, shelters from Philadelphia to Chicago reached out, asking if he would visit. He never charged a cent. Every class began the same way, with his soft voice saying, "Redemption sounds like kindness." Let's start from there. He brought donated instruments, many given by musicians who had seen his story online. Some were old and cracked, others freshly polished, but each held the same promise. Eli taught his students how to strum again, but more importantly, how to believe again. When their fingers stumbled, he smiled and said, "That's the sound of learning. Keep going." One evening, after a session at a Bronx shelter, a woman approached him in tears. She said her husband had been one of his first students and had just played his first sober concert in years. "He used to think he wasn't worth saving," she said. "Now he thinks he's worth a song." Eli's throat tightened. "He is," he said. "We all are." The next week, he invited Keanu and Johnny to visit one of his lessons. The room was filled with people tuning guitars, tapping rhythm on tables, and humming small melodies under their breath. When Keanu and Johnny walked in, there were gasps of disbelief. But Eli simply waved a hand. "Don't look at them like they're stars," he said with a grin. "They're just two guys who know how to listen." Johnny laughed, taking a seat among the students. "Can't argue with that," he said, clapping along as one man began strumming a blues riff. Keanu sat in the back, smiling quietly as Eli coached a young woman through her first song. She stumbled halfway through, frustrated, but Eli knelt beside her. "You're playing too hard," he said gently. "Music doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be honest." The room fell silent for a moment. The young woman nodded and tried again, her fingers finding the notes slowly, carefully. When she finished, the applause was small but real. Keanu watched her face light up and felt a warmth spread through him, the same feeling he'd had that night outside Madison Square Garden when they'd first heard Eli play. Later, as the group packed up, Eli turned to them both. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think my story ended on a sidewalk with a broken guitar. But maybe that's just where the chorus began." Johnny smiled. Man, that's a line worth recording. Keanu gave a faint nod. It already is. A few weeks later, a journalist approached Johnny for an interview. The world still wanted to talk about the night at the Blue Lantern. But Johnny steered the conversation elsewhere. "We didn't save him," he said simply. "We just reminded him he could still save himself." Yet even as headlines tried to capture the meaning, the message remained untouched. It wasn't a celebrity story anymore. It was human. The movement grew quietly. Musicians began volunteering at shelters, donating lessons and instruments. Arts programs across the country were inspired to reopen. In one interview, a community organizer said, "Eli Turner didn't just play a comeback song. He built a bridge for all of us to walk across." Eli kept teaching, never accepting money, never letting the fame distract him. Someone tried to thank him, he'd shake his head and smile. "Don't thank me," he'd say. "Thank the music. It's been waiting for you." One afternoon, Keanu returned to visit the class again. He stood near the door, unnoticed for a while, watching Eli guide a group of teenagers through a blues progression. The room filled with laughter, rhythm, and courage. Keanu smiled, a quiet pride glowing in his eyes. It was no longer about helping one man find his song. It was about the harmony that followed. And in that harmony, everyone was finally home. The quiet after Eli's rise felt different for both Keanu and Johnny. It wasn't the usual calm that follows a good deed. It was heavier, deeper, something that reached into places they hadn't touched in years. Watching Eli rebuild his life had awakened memories they'd both buried long ago. Memories of people they couldn't save. One night, after one of Eli's teaching sessions, the three men sat together in the dim glow of a small cafe. Eli talked about his next project, a music therapy group for recovering addicts. Johnny nodded proudly. Keanu smiled, but both fell silent when Eli said, "You two saved me from dying, with my song still inside me." Keanu's eyes drifted to the window. The rain outside blurred the lights of passing cars, and for a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "I had a friend once," he said. "He was young, brilliant, full of life. We worked together. He was like a brother." Johnny looked up, knowing exactly where the story was headed. Keanu continued, his tone steady but raw. "He got lost. Hollywood swallowed him whole. Drugs, fame, pressure, it all happened too fast. I tried to help, but I couldn't reach him in time. I found out the next morning that he was gone." He paused, taking a deep breath. He died outside a club, alone. The room went still. Eli didn't speak. He didn't have to. He knew that kind of loss, the kind that echoes through years, refusing to fade. Keanu stared at his hands, as if seeing that night all over again. "I've carried that with me ever since. Every time I meet someone on the edge, I think about him. I think about what could have been different." He looked up at Eli. "When I met you, it felt like maybe this was the chance I didn't get back then." Eli's throat tightened. "You mean River?" he said softly. Keanu nodded once, a faint sadness flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, River Phoenix. He was one of the good ones." Johnny leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You're not the only one who's carried ghosts, brother." Keanu glanced at him, and Johnny exhaled slowly. "When I was still trying to make it in music, I had friends, good ones, who never made it past the bar gigs, the lifestyle, the loneliness, the bottles that never stayed empty long enough. I watched one of them fade out on stage one night, right in the middle of a song. The paramedics came, but it was too late." Eli listened, eyes wet. The stories felt like echoes of his own. Three men from three different roads, each haunted by the same unfinished symphony. Johnny looked at Keanu and then at Eli. "When we found you that night," he said softly, "it wasn't about charity. It was about rewriting an ending we've seen too many times. Eli lowered his head, the weight of their words pressing deep into his chest. Keanu nodded. And tonight, we turned that silence into music. Keanu's words lingered in the air, like the fading note of a song that refused to end. Johnny sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping the table gently, keeping time with thoughts he didn't want to say out loud. The cafe around them hummed with low chatter and jazz from the speakers, but their corner of the room felt suspended, three men bound by loss, by memory, and by the rare grace of survival. Johnny broke the silence first. You know, I used to think fame fixed everything. The applause, the money, the lights. But it doesn't. It just hides the hurt better. Keanu looked over at him, understanding in his eyes. It hides it. Yeah, but it also makes it harder to heal, because everyone thinks you already did. Eli nodded slowly. The world loves you when you're shining, but they forget how heavy it gets to keep the light on. Johnny smiled faintly. That's exactly it. You carry the weight of expectation until it breaks your back, and when it does, people just call it a fall. Helping you wasn't about saving a stranger, Eli. It was about giving meaning to what we couldn't fix before. It was redemption for all three of us. Eli's voice cracked slightly. You two gave me a reason to live again. I don't even know how to thank you. Keanu shook his head. You already did. Every time you teach, every time someone finds hope through your song. Johnny leaned forward, resting a hand on Eli's shoulder. We all carry pain, man. But when you turn it into something that helps others, that's when it stops owning you. For a while, no one spoke. The music drifting through the cafe seemed to soften, as if listening. Keanu's mind wandered again, back to that night decades ago, when River Phoenix had collapsed outside the Viper Room. He'd never forgotten the sound of the sirens, the disbelief, the helplessness. And now, watching Eli alive, laughing, playing again, it was as if the universe had finally let one of those broken chords resolve. Johnny thought of his old friend too, the one who died mid-performance, his guitar still humming. He'd carried that image for years, haunted by it. Now, in Eli's music, he heard something different, a continuation, a note that didn't end in tragedy. Eli studied both of them, his voice trembling. Maybe this was all supposed to happen, he said. All that pain, all those years, maybe it was leading us here. Keanu smiled faintly. Pain can destroy you, or it can wake you up. We just chose to stay awake. Johnny raised his glass slightly. 2 second chances, he said. Eli clinked his cup against Johnny's, then looked at Keanu. And to the people who don't walk away. Keanu met his gaze, the faintest glimmer of emotion in his eyes. No one should have to walk alone, he said. The three of them sat there in silence, not the kind that hurt, but the kind that healed. Outside, the rain had stopped again, and the city lights reflected off the wet streets like a sea of tiny lanterns, each one glowing with the promise of another story, another chance, another song waiting to be played. Months passed, and New York began to thaw into early summer. The city that had once swallowed Eli now seemed to hum in tune with him. His name appeared quietly on flyers across community centers and subway stations, advertising a charity concert called Songs for the Street. The event aimed to raise funds for homeless musicians trying to find their way back. Men and women who, like him, had been one song away from giving up. Eli had organized everything himself, from the lineup to the sound checks. He wanted it to be about the people who still slept beneath the bridges and in the alleys, holding on to broken instruments and forgotten dreams. But there were two names he wanted beside him that night: Keanu and Johnny. He called them both one evening, nervous but determined. I'm doing something special, he said, for the people who never got the second chance. I did. I'd like you to be part of it. Johnny's voice came through first, amused, but touched. You mean play? Like actually play? Eli chuckled. Yeah, on stage. No press, no headlines, just music. Keanu's tone was warm and calm. You don't even have to ask. We're in. Good, Eli said. But there's one condition: you're not on the poster. Johnny laughed. You're telling me the world's two most recognizable faces can't even get a name mention? Eli smiled. If your names are there, it'll be about fame. If they're not, it'll be about faith. Keanu nodded. Then faith it is. When the night of the show arrived, the old theater on 9th Avenue was packed. Not with celebrities or critics, but with people from every walk of life. Buskers, veterans, single mothers, kids from shelters, and music lovers who had followed Eli's story online. The sign above the entrance was hand-painted, glowing softly under the marquee lights. Songs for the street. Inside, the atmosphere was electric but humble. The stage was small, lit by strings of amber bulbs. The air buzzed with anticipation. Eli stood backstage tuning his guitar, his heart steady in a way it hadn't been in years. He looked out through the curtain and smiled when he saw Keanu and Johnny sitting in the front row, dressed simply, unnoticed by most of the crowd. The show began with local musicians performing their own songs, stories of struggle and rebirth. Each act earned applause that felt personal, not polite. Eli watched from the wings, his chest swelling with pride. Every chord, every verse, felt like a continuation of something bigger than himself. When it was finally his turn, he stepped onto the stage, carrying his guitar. The audience erupted in cheers, many already recognizing the man who had once played Lantern Light at the Blue Lantern months ago. He smiled, waited for the noise to fade, and said into the microphone, "Tonight isn't about me. It's about everyone who ever thought their song was over. It never is." Eli began to play. The opening, chords of Lantern Light echoed through the small theater, warm and steady. His voice carried the same ache it always had, but this time, it was filled with something brighter peace. The audience swayed softly, some wiping tears, others holding hands. Each lyric painted the story of the streets, the loss, and the miracle of finding light again. Halfway through the song, he paused. The room waited, unsure if something was wrong. Eli looked toward the front row where Keanu and Johnny sat, both smiling quietly, both knowing what was coming. "I wasn't supposed to do this," Eli said into the microphone, "but I can't finish this song without the two men who helped me find it." The audience stirred, curious. He gestured toward the crowd. "Keanu, Johnny, get up here." Laughter and applause rippled through the room. Keanu shook his head at first, embarrassed, but Johnny stood and tugged his arm. "Come on, man," he said. "You heard the boss." They climbed the few steps to the stage. The crowd gasped when the lights caught their faces. The theater filled with energy, but Eli waved his hand to quiet them. "No spotlights tonight," he said gently. "Just music." A stagehand brought out an extra guitar and a bass. Johnny slung the guitar strap over his shoulder, tuning by instinct. Keanu tested the bass, fingers light but sure. Eli smiled at them both, his eyes wet. "Let's make this one count." They began again, this time together. Johnny's steady rhythm grounded the song. Keanu's bass hummed beneath it like a heartbeat, and Eli's voice soared above, rich and alive. The three sounds blended perfectly, not flawless, but pure human, real, honest. The crowd fell into complete silence, as if afraid to break the spell. When the final chorus came, the audience began humming along. Eli's voice cracked, but he kept going, laughing through the tears. Keanu looked up from his bass and caught his eye, nodding softly. Johnny leaned into his stand, mic just enough to add harmony, the low rasp of his voice filling the space between the notes. The song ended with one long, sustained chord. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if on cue, the entire theater rose to their feet. The applause was deafening. Pure gratitude turned into sound. Eli stood between Keanu and Johnny, their arms over each other's shoulders, all three of them smiling like men who had finally made peace with their pasts. Eli lifted the microphone one last time. "Thank you for listening," he said. "And thank you for reminding me that even the quietest song deserves to be heard." The crowd cheered again, but this time, Keanu and Johnny stepped back, letting Eli have the moment. He bowed deeply, the lights reflecting in his tears. It wasn't fame that filled the room. That night, it was healing. And for the first time, the world wasn't divided by stars and strangers. It was united by one thing that never fades: hope reborn through music. A week after the Songs for the Street concert, a letter arrived at Keanu's Los Angeles home. The envelope was old-fashioned, the handwriting uneven but familiar. He carried it out to his porch, the late afternoon light softening across the sky. The world outside was calm, the kind of quiet that made moments like this feel sacred. He sat down, opened the envelope carefully, and began to read. "Dear Keanu and Johnny, I've started this letter at least a dozen times, and each attempt fell apart halfway through. There aren't enough words to describe what you've done for me. You didn't just give me back music, you gave me back my life." Keanu's eyes moved slowly down the page. The handwriting trembled in some places, steadied in others. "When you found me that night on the sidewalk, I had no plans to see another sunrise. I thought I'd already lived every note I was ever going to play. But you both saw something I couldn't. You looked past the dirt, the bottle, the shaking hands, and you saw a man who still had a song left. Now, months later, I'm sober. I work with local nonprofits, teaching music therapy, and helping people rebuild their confidence the same way you helped me rebuild mine. Every weekend, I help repair old guitars donated to our shelter. We fix them up, clean them, restring them, and hand them to anyone who needs a reason to keep going." Keanu paused, taking in the words slowly. He could almost hear Eli's voice behind each sentence. Gentle, humble, full of gratitude. "You once told me that healing isn't linear. You were right. Some days, I still wake up with ghosts sitting on my chest. But now I play them songs instead of hiding from them. And every time I strike a chord, I think of that night the way you both stayed when you didn't have to." Keanu smiled faintly. The image of that freezing New York alley came back to him: the shaky guitar, the broken voice that somehow reached past the noise of the city. He turned the page. "People ask me what. It's like having two of the most famous men in the world as my friends. I tell them it's not about fame, it's about faith. Faith that kindness still exists. Faith that music can still save us when words fail." Keanu's hand tightened slightly on the paper. The wind stirred the corner of the page, and he pressed it down, not ready for the moment to end. He continued reading, his heart quiet but full. "I keep the guitar Johnny gave me by my bed. It's more than wood and strings. It's proof that miracles don't always come with trumpets. Sometimes they just walk quietly beside you until you're ready to hear again." Keanu turned the final page of the letter, and his eyes softened as the last paragraphs unfolded in Eli's trembling handwriting. "I wanted you both to know that Lantern Light isn't just a song anymore. It's become a movement. The shelters we've partnered with now host open mic nights every Friday. Some of the people I've taught are writing their own songs. Songs about recovery, forgiveness, and starting over. I see myself in each of them, and it reminds me that one spark can light 100 candles. You once told me, Keanu, that ghosts can still make people feel something. I think I understand now. Every time I play for someone who's still fighting their demons, I feel River in the crowd, smiling somewhere. And Johnny, your words about second chances stay with me every time I see someone's hands stop shaking long enough to play their first clean note. If the world ever asks what the two of you did for me, tell them this. You taught me that fame doesn't define greatness. Compassion does. Keanu leaned back in his chair, the last line catching in his chest. The porch was quiet except for the sound of wind through the trees. He folded the letter slowly, handling it as though it were made of glass. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not pride, but peace. He reached for his phone and dialed Johnny. You got something in the mail? He asked. Johnny's voice came through, amused. Yeah, I just finished reading it. Man, I'm still trying to blink the dust out of my eyes. Keanu chuckled softly. Same here. There was a long pause, the kind that needed no words. Johnny finally said, This is what fame should do, you know? Not build walls, amplify love. Keanu nodded, his gaze fixed on the sunset, painting the horizon gold. Exactly. If even one life gets pulled out of the dark because of what we did, then that's worth more than all the applause in the world. Johnny's tone softened. You thinking what I'm thinking? Yeah, Keanu said. We keep doing it. Quietly. No press. Just help the ones who need it most. Anonymous kindness, Johnny said with a grin. The best kind. Keanu smiled. The only kind. They talked a while longer about Eli's work, about the new workshops he was planning, about the ripple effect spreading further than any of them could have imagined. When the call ended, Keanu sat there for a moment, watching the last streaks of sunlight fade behind the hills. Then he looked down at the letter one more time. You didn't just give me back music, you gave me back my life. He read the sentence again and again until the words blurred. Folding the paper carefully, he slipped it into an old wooden box beside his chair, a place where he kept the few things that truly mattered. Then he looked out over the quiet evening and whispered, Thank you, Eli. Far across the country, Johnny poured himself a cup of coffee and placed his own copy of the letter on his piano. He touched the keys lightly, playing the opening notes of Lantern Light. The melody lingered, soft and honest, echoing everything they had all been through. In different cities, under the same sky, two men sat in silence, bound by a friendship born from compassion. And somewhere in New York, Eli tuned his guitar, preparing for another lesson. 3 lives intertwined, 3 hearts still in harmony, proof that kindness, once played, never stops reverberating. A year passed since Songs for the Street, and the Blue Lantern looked reborn. The cracked neon sign had been repaired, its blue light glowing steady against the night sky. The bar had become a sanctuary again, a place where music, not misery, lived. On this night, its walls pulsed with warmth. The event posters read, Memorial Night Honoring Street. Performers, gone but not forgotten. Eli stood by the entrance, greeting people as they arrived. He looked different now, stronger, confident, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans, his hair tied loosely back. His smile came easily. Each handshake carried gratitude, each embrace a quiet acknowledgement of how far he'd come. The bar was full long before the show began. Familiar faces filled the tables, musicians, outreach volunteers, and locals who remembered his story. Near the back, unnoticed by most, 2 men sat quietly. Keanu and Johnny. They had flown in the night before, not to perform this time, but simply to witness what they'd helped ignite. Johnny leaned back, adjusting his hat. You know, he whispered, place looks a lot different without all the dust and despair. Keanu smiled faintly. It sounds different too. On stage, Eli's students tuned their guitars and adjusted mics. Some had been homeless just a year before. Others were veterans, buskers, or recovering addicts who had found peace in music. Eli had brought them all together for this one night to honor those who hadn't made it out of the darkness. The ones still remembered in songs whispered across subway tunnels and street corners. The lights dimmed, and the audience quieted. Eli stepped forward, guitar in hand, and said, "This place gave me my life back. Tonight, we play for those who didn't get that chance. But I believe their songs still travel through us." The first notes drifted across the room, slow and heavy with emotion. His students joined in, each one adding a layer of sound: soft percussion, harmonica, piano. The music built like a rising tide, pulling everyone with it. Faces glowed in the warm amber light, eyes shining, hearts remembering. Keanu watched from the back, his expression calm but full of pride. He could feel the echo of the past in every chord, the broken man they'd found on a cold sidewalk, now leading others toward healing. Johnny leaned closer and whispered, "You feel that? That's what redemption sounds like." Keanu nodded slowly. "It's the sound of home." Eli played for nearly an hour, guiding each musician through their set, offering nods of encouragement and soft smiles between verses. The atmosphere inside the Blue Lantern felt alive again, but in a quieter, deeper way than fame or fortune could ever create. It wasn't about perfection. It was about belonging. When the final set ended, Eli stepped back up to the microphone, his guitar resting against his chest. "A year ago," he said, his voice steady, "I stood on this stage terrified, thinking my story was over. But tonight, I realize it was only the prologue. Every note we've played since then is part of a bigger song, a song that belongs to all of us." The crowd applauded softly, many wiping their eyes. Eli smiled and continued, "Before we close, I'd like to play something special. It's not just for me, it's for every soul who ever played to an empty room and every hand that kept strumming even when no one listened." He strummed the first chords of Lantern Light. The melody had matured richer, fuller, stronger than ever. This time, it wasn't a song of pain, but of gratitude. Halfway through, the other musicians joined in one by one, creating a wave of harmony that filled every corner of the bar. People in the audience began humming along. By the final chorus, it wasn't just a performance, it was a choir of healing. When the last chord rang out, the crowd rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the walls. Eli lowered his head, overcome, his fingers trembling not from weakness, but from awe. For the first time, the cheers weren't for survival. They were for strength. At the back of the room, Keanu and Johnny stood, clapping quietly. They didn't go to the stage. They didn't need to. This was Eli's night, his triumph, his homecoming. The man who had once played alone in the cold now filled a room with warmth and song. As the noise began to settle, the owner, Russell, stepped up beside Eli with something in his hands, a small bronze plaque mounted on a piece of oak. He handed it to Eli and said, "You left something behind last time you played here. Thought we'd give it back." Eli turned the plaque over, reading the inscription aloud. "The Blue Lantern, where kindness found its rhythm again." The room erupted in cheers once more. Eli looked toward the back, finding Keanu and Johnny in the crowd. He lifted the plaque high, smiling through his tears. "This doesn't belong to me," he said. "It belongs to everyone who believed in a broken man's song." Johnny raised his glass. "To the music that never dies." Keanu smiled softly. "And the hearts that keep it alive." As the lights dimmed, Eli began one final soft reprise of Lantern Light. Keanu and Johnny didn't move or speak. They simply listened, the melody washing over them like a memory fulfilled. The tune drifted out the open door, blending with the night sounds of the city, the hum of cars, the laughter of strangers, the rhythm of life continuing. When the last note faded, the crowd began chanting his name. Not as a celebrity, not as a man who had once fallen, but as one of their own. "Eli, Eli, Eli." Keanu leaned back against the wall, watching the moment unfold. His voice was low, almost lost in the noise. "He made it home," he said. Johnny glanced over and smiled. "Yeah," he replied. And somehow, so did we. They stood there for a long while, letting the applause roll through the air, knowing they had witnessed something that would live far beyond the night, a reminder that redemption isn't found in headlines or stages, but in the quiet triumph of a man who chose to keep playing when the world had gone silent. When the lights at the Blue Lantern faded and the crowd slowly spilled into the cool night, Keanu and Johnny stayed behind for a moment. The chairs were stacked, the tables empty, but the air still carried the hum of Eli's final song. It was as if the music hadn't ended. It had simply found a new home in every person who'd heard it. Keanu looked toward the stage where Eli had stood an hour earlier, his hands steady, his voice sure. The cracked wooden floor that once echoed loneliness now held the imprint of hope. Johnny leaned against the wall and said quietly, "Hard to believe this all started on a freezing sidewalk." Keanu nodded. That's the thing about small moments. You never realize which one's going to change everything. Outside, the city lights shimmered like reflections on water. New York never stopped moving, but that night, it felt gentler. Somewhere, in 1,000 unseen corners, people were strumming old guitars, humming songs they hadn't dared to sing in years. And it had all begun with one act of empathy, a pair of men who stopped long enough to listen. Months later, Eli's story spread far beyond the Blue Lantern. Music schools shared it as a lesson in perseverance. Shelters used it as proof that art could heal what medicine couldn't. Strangers sent letters from across the country saying his song helped them forgive themselves, or pick up an instrument, or simply believe again. Keanu never responded to interviews or requests for comment. He didn't need to. The story wasn't about him. It never had been. Johnny felt the same way. They had stepped into Eli's life not to rewrite his story, but to remind him he still had one worth telling. That night on the sidewalk had changed more than one man. It had reignited the soul of a musician and reminded the world that kindness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it waits in the cold until someone's ready to play again. Keanu thought about how many people he must have passed in his life without stopping. How many silent songs had gone unheard because the world was too busy rushing by. That realization stayed with him, shaping how he moved through the world. Every conversation, every glance at a stranger carried new weight. It wasn't about charity. It was about connection, about dignity. And that's what the night at the Blue Lantern came to symbolize. Not fame, not redemption, but humanity. The quiet understanding that everyone, no matter how lost, deserves to be heard. ChatGPT.noi. Keanu often revisited that thought during his long rides through the city. Whenever he stopped at a red light and saw a busker playing on the corner, he'd pause and listen. Sometimes, he dropped a few dollars in the case. Sometimes, he just nodded, letting the performer know someone heard them. Johnny did the same. They never told anyone about it. There were no cameras, no headlines, just quiet gestures that rippled through ordinary nights. A year after the memorial show, Keanu received another letter. This one wasn't from Eli, but from a young man named Marcus, a musician who had once been in Eli's shelter class. "He helped me believe that music could still be a bridge," it read. And when I asked him where he found that belief, he said, "Two men heard me when no one else did." Keanu folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Eli's first one in the wooden box on his porch. The wind rustled the trees nearby, and he closed his eyes, feeling the deep peace that came only from knowing something good would continue long after you were gone. Johnny called that evening. His tone was warm, filled with the easy laughter of an old friend. "Guess what I just saw?" he said. "A kid playing Lantern Light on the street in New Orleans. He said it's his favorite song. Didn't even know where it came from." Keanu smiled. "That's how you know it worked," he said. "When the kindness forgets who started it." There was a long pause before Johnny added, "Crazy how one night can echo like that. We just stopped to listen. Man, that's all." "Yeah," Keanu said softly, "but sometimes listening is everything." That was the lesson the world took from Eli Turner's journey. It wasn't about the fame of the people who helped him, or the number of views his song gathered online. It was about the simple truth that kindness, when shared quietly, becomes infinite. It travels from heart to heart, crossing streets, cities, and lives, asking for nothing but to be passed on. The Blue Lantern continued to thrive, its walls lined with photos of performers who had found their way back from despair. Above the stage hung that same plaque, "Where kindness found its rhythm again." And every time someone new stepped onto the small wooden platform, they played with the understanding that they were part of something larger than music. They were part of a living testament to compassion. One night, long after the crowd had left, Keanu and Johnny stopped by the bar together. The owner turned the lights down low and poured them both coffee. Eli's guitar hung on the wall behind the counter, signed simply with the words, "Keep playing." They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. Keanu looked around the room and whispered, "We didn't save a man, Johnny. We just reminded him of who he was." Johnny nodded. "And maybe in the process, we remembered who we are too." Outside, the city hummed, as it always did, cars passing, lights flickering, people hurrying home. But for a moment, it all felt slower, softer, kinder. Because somewhere deep within that noise, there was still music. Music born from mercy, from a single act of listening on a cold night. The story of Eli Turner became a quiet legend, not because of celebrity, but because it showed the world something timeless. True greatness isn't in the applause you earn, it's in the hope you restore. That truth lived on in every note of lantern light, in every open guitar case, in every voice that dared to sing again. And maybe, as the lights dimmed and the world moved forward, someone, somewhere, stopped to listen to a broken melody, a trembling hand, a story still being written. Because that's where kindness begins, with a pause, a glance, and a willingness to hear. Have you ever seen kindness give someone a second chance? What story of Keanu's compassion should we tell next?